Hi, I'm Melanie Ann Phillips, co-creator of the Dramatica theory and software, and welcome to another episode of Dramatica Unplugged, that weekly series of explorations into the Dramatica theory to give you tips for story structure and storytelling that you can use with or without the Dramatica software. We're going to be dealing again with the first stage of storytelling called storyforming. Now, what do I mean by a stage of storytelling? Well, in fact, you can divide all aspects of story creation into two parts, the elements of structure and the art of storytelling. Now, the elements of structure are the pieces that go in to make up the underlying dramatic relationships of the story, and that includes character, plot, theme, and genre. Then, once you have those pieces that you're working with, how do you put them together? How do you actually construct a story? Well, that's the process of storytelling. And there are four stages in storytelling: story forming, story encoding, story weaving, and reception. Each one has a different meaning. Now, authors generally will do all of them together as part of the inspiration process, following the muse. But once you've written and it comes time to analyze what you've done, looking at the differences between those stages of communication between author and audience help you determine where problems are. Are they in your structure that you created in the story form, or are they in your actual writing, way over in reception, or in the other two stages in the middle? Just as a reminder from our earlier class when we covered these in the beginning, dramatic overview of dramatic basics, the first stage, story forming, is where you actually take these elements of structure and make the unique story form for your story, the unique underlying dramatic structure. Not every element can be arranged in every conceivable way. Just like a Rubik's Cube, a corner piece can't be moved into the center. A corner piece will always stay the corner, and a center piece will always stay the center. It's when you twist it and turn it, you can end up with a multitude, a huge astronomical figure of different numbers of combinations out of the colors on the cube, but there's certain things that you just can't do. And the same is true with stories. If you look at the elements of character, plot, theme, and genre, there are certain things that can go together certain ways and other things that can't. Some things that can only go together this way if other things have gone together that way. So the process of putting these pieces together is story forming. All stories need all of the same pieces. It's how they're arranged that creates your unique story form. It's when you keep trying to use the same arrangement that you end up getting into formula. So by using the Dramatica software, for example, it will track all of these key story points, all of the ones that you need for a complete dramatic structure, and it will make sure that when you determine that you want these particular dramatics to have this kind of a relationship or this kind of an impact on your audience, that the other choices that it provides you will never be in conflict with what you've already determined you want to do dramatically. But you can story form without the software. Story forming is all about making decisions about the kind of impact you want to have on your audience and what dramatic elements have to be brought into conjunction, what dramatic choices have to be made in order to have that impact. Now, after you've got your story form, story encoding, the second stage, is when you turn those dramatic decisions into real people, places, and things. The actual scenes, dialogue, bits of action, bits of character movement, the words that you use, the music that's played, that will convey those underlying dramatic meanings and relationships. Now, even when you figured out what those symbols are going to be, what those real people, places, and things are going to be, you still don't have a plan for how you're going to tell the audience about it. And that brings you to the third stage of storytelling, which is story weaving. Here, you unveil what you have determined your story is about to the audience. You take these symbols you've created in story encoding, and you determine how you're going to parlay them out for your audience, how they'll play out, how you reveal them. It's your exposition plan. You still haven't written a word, but you figured out now, we're going to tell them what the goal is right away, or we're going to fool them into thinking the goal is one thing and it turns out to be another. Regardless of how you decide to unfold the information in stage 3 of storytelling, story weaving, by the end of story weaving, the audience must be able to put it together. So when you end up with something like Pulp Fiction or Remains of the Day that puts things out of order in time and juxtaposes things that aren't really connected, in order for the story to make sense structurally, by the end, the audience has to determine what the real order of things was, what the real symbols are that you really meant them to understand, and then underneath that, getting back to the first stage, what was the underlying dramatic structure that this represented? Look at something like Sixth Sense, and you'll see a great example of how information is parlayed out in story weaving in such a way that it misleads the audience until you finally are able to put it together and figure out what all the symbols, how they really work together as real people, places, and things, and from that discern the dramatic meaning. Finally, you get the fourth stage of storytelling, and that's story reception. Story reception sounds like it's not storytelling, it sounds like it's the audience sitting there getting whatever you transmit. But in fact, story reception is when you're doing your actual writing. So far you've story-formed a structure, story encoded the real people, places, and things, story woven an exposition plan, and now you have to sit down and write, and this is the first time you really have to think about what's the audience bringing to the process. What does the audience already know about your characters or the story you're telling? Maybe from advertising, maybe because it's a legendary story or a myth. What does the audience have in the way of buzzwords or keywords that they understand? Are there any shortcuts you can use culturally that when they see this, they're going to bring a lot of other previous information to the process so you don't have to explain everything? Or are you trying to create a piece that's perhaps cross-cultural, where it's got to play for the audience that understands all of those symbols, but it also has to play for an audience that doesn't? Meaning that you might want to put a character in your story while you're writing, in the writing process, simply there to be a confused character who doesn't understand the symbols. Then the culture that gets it right off the bat can laugh at that character's misconceptions, and the people in the audience who don't get it will learn through that character. So, in the process of writing, the words that you choose, how you're going to express yourself, that is actually story reception.